that I can send as is. Okay. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on essential conversations leading your team to return to the workplace. My name is Candace Gottlieb Clark. I'm the CEO and founder of Dynamic Team Solutions. I formed Dynamic Team Solutions because of my burning desire to help people have a change in the ways they work together. Our Dynamic team works with companies and organizations to help provide them with strategies and opportunities to change the ways that employees engage, the ways leaders lead, and to create a collaborative work environment. We provide services that, can I start over? I'm so sorry. One last try. I'm almost better live because I don't second guess and I just keep going. But once I feel off track, I feel like I have to start over.
Okay.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's program, Essential Conversations Leading Your Team to the Return to the Workplace. My name is Candace Gottlieb Clark. I am the CEO and founder of Dynamic Team Solutions. I formed my company with a burning desire to transform the ways people work together. Our Dynamic team provides services including executive coaching, team development, and conflict resolution with the goal of helping to transform the way employees engage with one another, to create strong leaders and a collaborative work environment. Today, joining me are two of our exceptional coaches, Margalit Ward and Hillary Bendon, who will be leading today's program. Margalit Ward is an exceptional coach, facilitator, and trainer. She has a background in counseling psychology, and she is the founder of the Women's Network Los Angeles. Is that the right name, Margalit?
It's actually Professional Women's Network LA.
Thank you. And also joining me today is Hillary Bendon. Hillary is both an organizational expert and conflict resolution expert. She has master's degrees in public administration and conflict resolution. She is also a SHRM, a specialist in human resource professionals. I am saying that wrong. What was it, Hillary? Hillary, you're muted.
SPHR, Senior Professional in Human Resources.
Thank you. Forgive me for getting that wrong. Both of our two exceptional coaches have worked with a number of clients of ours and have worked across the globe in trying to, well, maybe not across the globe, but definitely throughout the nation in helping different clients with this issue and how to return to the workplace. And I will let them introduce themselves now.
Well, good morning, everyone. Margalit here. I'm really grateful that I get a chance to be with all of you. Thank you for joining us this hour, and I'm really happy to be here with Hillary. We're excited to share this information with you, and it's our intention that this information is really going to be helpful for you and some things that you can apply right away in your workplace with this new time in our world. So I'm happy to be here and looking forward to it.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Margalit. Thank you, Candace. And thank you, everybody who's here with us today. We're very excited, as Margalit indicated, to share this information with you to help provide you with things that you might be able to put into practice right away. And from that, I'm going to hand it back to Candace.
Actually, I think we're going to jump into the slides now. A little bit of housekeeping, just so you're all familiar. The program today is scheduled to last about 45 minutes. I'm going to ask you if you have your video on, please turn it off, and likewise to mute yourself. We think we took care of that, but in the event we did not. And I'm also going to take away my picture. So some housekeeping notes. Today's program will last about 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute period of question and answer where we can respond to your needs. Please use the chat window over to the right to note down those questions. You can send them to the group or you can send them to us privately. And that way you will be able to let us know what questions or concerns you have as the program goes forward. So let me tell you a little bit more about Dynamic Team Solutions before we move forward. Are you ready to be dynamic? Developing and maintaining a healthy, productive workplace is indelibly tied to the relations between your teams and leaders. And when we're looking at this situation of returning to work, it is more important than ever that we think about that relationship. At Dynamic Team Solutions, we know the value of a collaborative team. We excel in creating customized solutions that address the specific needs of your organization. Our talented and diverse team are experts in resolving issues of communication, teamwork, leadership, and workplace conflict. And we know it is great when your employees want to come to work, even in this trying time. But it becomes dynamic when they want to work with each other. So let's talk a bit about why we're here and where we are. The efforts to prepare and respond to the ever-changing climate of concern are a constant place of focus. Businesses across the globe are contending with the need to have this vital conversation with their employees about returning to the workplace. And the conversation seems to change pretty readily with what's happening in the news and with spikes in exposure that seem to happen as are currently going on. COVID-19, as we know, is a global interactive process. It is creating change in the ways we live, interact, socialize, and of course, work. And while we all want things to get back to normal, our responses and our emotions are very different. They can be very polarizing. Some are pushing for things to happen quickly. They want things to get back to what they perceive as normal. And others are much more hesitant and more concerned. They aren't ready to move forward unless they have certainty it will be safe. So today's webinar is to support you in navigating the return to the workplace, to offer guidance, share wisdom, provide strategies, and to help you know how to engage your employees in this really critical discussion. We want to help you to create a smooth transition, one that can build your team's ability to feel safe and ready to work together and collaborate so that they aren't distracted by the tensions of not knowing if others respect the concerns that they have, and if others are ready and willing and able to make the changes needed to keep it a safe, productive environment. Your efforts today will ensure that better structure and planning. They will leave you more sure-footed, ready for the next steps you need to take, and we are so glad you are here joining us and see the value in this conversation. Now let me hand the program off to Hillary and Margalit. Margalit.
All right, thank you, Candace. So let's jump into what we'll be covering today. And we're gonna start with preparation. This is the major part of really leading your team because there's a lot to cover, and this section has a lot that we will be looking at in terms of identifying your work plan and policies. What are some of the logistics you want to make sure that you'll cover in your meeting, such as including safety measures, staging the site, scheduling, and employee requirements. And then we'll cover initiating the session. And in this section, we'll talk about the role of the facilitator. And this is very important because this is a sensitive topic for some people because it can bring up different challenges that we're all facing in this, this very unusual time in history. So we'll be sharing suggestions and guidelines on how to initiate the meeting, as well as addressing the appropriate tone, all in support of creating engagement and a successful outcome for you and your team. And then we'll jump into facilitating what to do during your meeting, what to cover, questions to ask, and ways for you to engage your team members. And then we'll cover how to close the meeting, as well as how to make sure you have a plan for following up once the meeting is over. And as Candace was saying, things are changing day by day. So this is a very fluid topic, as I'm sure everybody is aware of. And as she also mentioned, we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have any questions that come up, just jot them down, and then you'll have time at the end to put them into the chat. Also, in addition to walking through the steps, preparing and leading your teams, we also want to impart the importance of being aware of the sensitive and personal challenges that this can create for your team. The idea for returning to work, like as I mentioned, can stir challenges, maybe some fears or anxiety for some people. And I've heard it said, and I thought this was a great way to talk about what's happening, is that, we're all weathering the same storm, but we're experiencing in different boats. So depending on how each of your employees and team have been, living and working from home, whether by themselves or with their family. They're all experiencing it in different ways. So being sensitive to that nature of it and bringing that place of creating psychological safety as they walk through this process. So we do have a lot to cover. Let's jump in, and Hillary will take us into the preparation phase.
Thank you, Margalit. So in the preparation phase, I want to share with you some ideas for preparing to have the plan and then how to use that plan and prepare for it to have the meeting. So before we begin dive into the meat of what I'm going to be sharing with you, I want you to think about the considerations that you have about returning to site or remaining remote. So that's really the first question you want to consider. You want to keep in mind team alignment. You want to keep in mind how you're communicating with your team, making sure that you have high-touch communication and transparency. The more knowledge you give your team about what the plans are, the better it creates psychological safety. And then, of course, you want to have regularly scheduled meetings so that you can follow through on those meetings. If you're thinking about returning to site versus staying remote, you want to think about what are other similar businesses doing? What could change your plan? If you're planning on returning to site, what might change that, and how would you communicate that to your team? What requirements will exist for individuals for returning? Will you be taking temperatures? Will you be requiring them to have no symptoms? Will you be requiring them to test, to have a negative test before they return? And then, of course, you want to collaborate within your leadership so that you had a broad range of input and advice from everybody involved. So now we're going to move forward and look at identifying your plan. Margalit, can you go back? Thanks. We're going to look forward. We're going to look towards identifying your plan, determining internal policy, and considerations for return. So in terms of identifying your plan, that's basically what I was talking about when I was talking about return to work, return to site versus staying remote. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about internal policy. So it's important to be clear what your internal policies are about health issues, social distancing, physical arrangements, use of common areas. What are the building requirements regarding safety and entry and exit, movement into the building and out of the building? Psychological as well as physical safety, and many other things. A well thought out and executed plan is essential to protect both employees and the organization. So we want to think about the considerations for return. And on the next slide, we're going to go deeper into what those considerations are. So the considerations that you want to consider to begin with are: when will you return to site? Will everyone return at the same time? Will everyone or some people return at full time into the office, or staged and staggered schedules? Will this be a temporary or permanent return? Will some people remain remote? You want to think about what's going to happen if the pandemic shoots up again, if the number of cases increases in your area. What are the determinations of going back to remote or staying within the site? Will returning to the office be optional or required for your individual employees? Will there be exceptions? If so, how will they be determined? You want to be aware of and follow the guidelines set by governmental agencies such as city, county, state, EEOC, and OSHA. So it's really important that once you've planned your policies, rules, exceptions, and contingencies, that you continue to plan by determining the parameters of your return, and in particular, the logistics. So on the next slide, we're going to look at how it's important to plan a safe workplace, both physically and psychologically. Margalit alluded to the fact that we really need to consider not just the physical safety, but the psychological safety of our employees. Many people experience the pandemic different. Well, all people experience it differently. And I love that metaphor that Margalit used about we're all dealing with the same storm, but we're in different boats. That's very true. And I've had experiences with our clients that when they're returning to work, when they're planning to return to work, people are dealing with it very differently, and it's important to keep that in mind. So when you define the protocols and consequences or actions, you want to think about what happens when they're not followed. What happens when your protocols are not put into place by people who come back to the site? So you want to look at the protocols, the behaviors within the office, common areas such as meeting rooms, kitchen, bathrooms, etc. Every aspect of work-life logistics is going to require a protocol. It's really quite an effort to come up with a return to site plan that covers as much as you can possibly think of. You would be surprised. I've worked with many clients on this, and they determine in going through, you have to go through every step that an employee takes into the building, into the office. Even things like when they come into the office, which way do they walk in, and when they go out of the office, which way do they leave? If you only have one door, how are you going to keep people social distance? If you have two doors, which one is going to be the entrance and which one is going to be the exit? It's really a lot of thinking about what protocols you're going to have. So the first thing that you want to define is how you'll schedule your team. You'll want to think about how you're going to stage the office. You're going to think about staggering work times and days. You're going to think about desk placement to allow for social distancing. You want to think about changing work times for some people, maybe making some earlier and some later so that you have less people in the office at the same time. You want to think about the availability of the amenities. Are you going to continue to provide coffee? What are you going to do about plates and silverware that's being used in the kitchen? You want to be clear on the number or percentage of people in the office at one time. Then you're going to move on to cleaning and supplies. So in terms of supplies, what will you provide? What's required by law for you to provide? I know in California, the rule is that if you require masks, if you require gloves, whatever you require, you're going to have to provide those or be willing to provide those to your employees. In terms of cleaning, what will be the office cleaning schedule? How often will it be cleaned? What type of cleaning? Will you have sanitized the office prior to returning to site? What are the requirements for personal space or personal desk cleaning? I have one client that I've worked with where their requirement is that employees sanitize their desk, disinfect their desk with the appropriate supplies every other day. If you have employees that are going to be sharing desks one day on, one day off, it's important that you think about getting them to clean it on a daily basis. Then you want to think about what are the building's requirements? What are the plans around entry and exit? What kind of cleaning is the building going to be doing? What kind of air purification system do they have? I was working with a client and we were discussing the plan with the leadership team, and all of a sudden somebody brought up something we'd never thought of, which was, what is the building doing to purify the air? This is an office that doesn't open, the windows don't open. So they really were, this person was concerned about what kind of filtration system was being used. So you'll be surprised at some of the things that you don't think of that other people do. So there are many things to consider. And at this point, we're going to move on to defining what the return to site requirements are. So you want to think about individual needs and exceptions to the planned expectations. So you're going to have expectations around health, mental health, family. These are all things you need to consider when you're bringing people back into the office. You want to think about meeting logistics. How many people can be in a room at a given time? After the meeting is over, what about cleaning the office or the conference room? You want to think about scheduling of conference rooms to account for cleaning as well as use of the room. You want to think about managing illness under exposure. You may need to refine your sick policy, considering the new government rules that are put into place. I know that in California, there are requirements around how much sick time people get, but now with COVID, there are new rules that need to be followed. How long will you have these protocols that you set up in place? What is your determination of when we can go back to how it was, if ever? What will happen if someone in the office gets COVID? Will you go back to remote work? Will you do contact tracing? Will you require testing, or will you provide testing for employees who may have been exposed? So you can see that returning to site requires considerable forethought and planning, and this should be started well in advance of your return to site date. Now that we've gone over all the many things that need to be considered in terms of your plan to return to site, we're going to talk a little bit about preparing for the meeting that you're going to be having to communicate. And after I go over this information, Margalite's going to go into initiating and facilitating the meeting itself. In advance of the meeting, you want to think about, what is your culture of communication? If you have a certain type of way that you communicate with your team, are you going to use that same system? Are you going to have an all hands meeting? Are you going to have people who, are you going to have it in teams, team meetings rather than all hands? Are you going to provide a PowerPoint or simply have discussion? Are you going to provide written communication in advance of the meeting, during the meeting, or after the meeting? When will you, who will be leading the meeting? Who will be present? Will you have a mandatory requirement to attend the meeting? And then if you're having an online meeting, which I imagine most of you will, in advance of returning to site, you need to remember that it takes as much or more preparation to create an online meeting as it does to create an in-person meeting. If your company, for example, uses Microsoft Teams and you want to be able to do breakout sessions, is it capable of doing that? Or are you going to have to change to Zoom? What logistics are necessary, such as technology? What do you need to provide? What do you need to be prepared in order to prepare the meeting and then move into the facilitation, the initiation and facilitation? So I'm going to hand it back to Margalite to move forward on what we're offering.
Great, thank you, Hillary. And as you can see, there is a lot to the preparation phase of creating this type of meeting. So I just want to encourage, if any of you may be feeling a little overwhelmed by all the information, to just know, we're all facing this, we're all working through this, and to be patient with yourselves and, maybe chunking it down into sections so that, it's more manageable. But we understand that there is a lot here to navigate and digest. So we'll just kind of continue on taking it step by step. So we'll move into how to facilitate your meeting. So you've taken the steps now to prepare, and you want to get ready for your meeting and thinking about your role as a facilitator, which is really all about leading your people through a process that encourages participation, where everyone feels like their voice matters, they have ownership, that there's mutual respect, and really room for creativity for everybody involved. And I think we can sum up the facilitator role with these 3 parts of this diagram, starting with the role as a conductor and guiding your team neutrally with developing and staying on track with your agreed upon rules and norms to follow to create a successful meeting. And like a conductor in an orchestra, you're guiding this framework to enable each person's contribution to create an outcome that's even greater for the whole group as well. And then as a coach, you're supporting your group to design a constructive way to work together, identifying any needs to address, and asking them questions to help engage everyone involved. And being that this is such a unique process in time, creating that engagement is so important. And also as a catalyst for getting your team engaged in this discussion, you're allowing for their input and ideas, helping to explore strategies that will benefit the objectives of the meeting, will benefit the company, the team, and individuals as well. So as a facilitator, you're focusing on these qualities to support your team to feel engaged and encouraged to participate. And it's also important to be mindful of the tone, as I mentioned earlier, that you're demonstrating with how you communicate and listen, bringing a mindset of empathy, seeking to listen to understand your team members, valuing their presence and input, and letting them know that you care can really go much farther in making them feel a sense of belonging, cultivating that psychological safety, really more than any policy and procedure can. So really how you're bringing your own participation is so vital. And then it's also important to allow for disagreements. You know, not everybody is experiencing this in the same way as we talked about earlier. So with your ground rules of being mutually respectful, open-minded for each other's input in a way that is comfortable for your culture. And again, this supports, you know, creating that safety and having that more open and solution-focused meetings. And then you also want to revisit your guidelines that you've established for your meetings so far, you know, up until this date. So everyone's kind of has that fresh in their minds. And because the topic is so new for everyone, we suggest that you also invite input for any group norms that may be new that will support the team at this time, and or add any that you've thought of that you think would be helpful as well. So that's the focus on facilitating the meeting. And now we'll talk about initiating the meeting. And you really want to start your meeting with the focus of gratitude, thanking your team for being there, appreciating them for their hard work that they've already been contributing, however that fits for your unique office, your unique workspace, workplace, and, you know, thanking them for being present, working together during this challenging time. And it's really a powerful way to create that connection, building trust, you know, or establishing a place that's safe for them to share. And they know that, you know, that it's okay for them to step into this unknown territory. And then you want to also communicate your purpose and objectives for returning to the work site. And what is your vision? What is your vision and hopes that you hope the team will experience during this process? And it's also important to be honest and open with what you know and what you don't know. And it's really important for you as leaders to be transparent, communicate authentically, then to be silent about those things that you may not know, because again, that creates the trust and making everyone feeling secure during each stage of this transition. And you'll be sharing the agenda, what you'll cover in the meeting, and again, reminding your team of the guidelines and the group norms that you will either reassess or create at the time. And then it'd be time to just walk through the team, what you've created for your plan. What are the logistics, expectations, and protocols that you've created during the preparation phase, and sharing in a way that's very clear and relevant and easy to understand and implement. And I think Hillary had mentioned, you know, the idea of having something written. I think that would be really helpful if they have something during the meeting, either a PowerPoint or a PDF that they can walk through the plan along with the meeting itself, and also to use as a reference for after the meeting as well, since there is so much information that they're going to be having to digest. And then as far as engaging the team, once you've outlined the plan and you've prepared to let them know what you want, that you want to let them know that, that their input matters, that they have a voice in this, that you're open and inviting their suggestions, any questions or concerns that they may have, is a time for you to listen, a time for you to create a space where, you know, we're all in this together and we'll get through this together. You know, our leadership is so important right now when people are feeling uncertain about the future, because we all just are walking through this day by day. And then you'll also want to ask them to identify any gaps, anything that they think you might have missed, anything else that should be considered or added to the plan. So that pretty much covers the whole part of facilitating the session, having the session. And now Hillary's going to talk a little bit about how you will close the session.
So after you've gone through everything that you've put together as a protocol, it's really important to know that you have to close the meeting so that people feel that they have gotten all the information, or that they're welcome to ask questions during the meeting and also after the meeting. So you want to be sure that whatever commitments you've made, that they're aware of the forthcoming changes, that those commitments might mean significant change to the way people are doing things, and therefore you need to be clear on what those commitments are. So even though you've gone over the commitments during the meeting, you also want to have a way of closing the meeting, giving them a summary of the changes that are going to happen. You also want to talk about how you're going to circle back. How are you going to handle the questions that have arisen that you don't have the answers to? How are you going to reconvene? Are you going to have another meeting in the same vein as this meeting? And then how are issues that come up later going to be addressed? Who can people go to give specific questions to? Who can they ask? Are they going to go to their manager? Are they going to go to HR? Is there a point person? Who is that point person? And people need to know that all the information they got, which is probably going to be overwhelming for people during the meeting itself, that if they have questions later, who can they go to? What kinds of questions will be addressed? What kinds of personal issues? How are they going to address those personal issues if they have a family member that's at high risk and you're asking them to return to site? How is that going to be handled? And then of course you want to end the meeting with the same gratitude that you started it with. You want to thank people for their participation. You want to make sure that they're aware that you are thankful for what they've done so far for the company during the remote work. Or if the site has been closed and you haven't had people doing remote work, you want to thank them for coming back. You want to have gratitude for your employees so that they know that you care about them and that you're concerned about their well-being, both their physical and psychological safety, as well as that of the company. So now I'm going to throw it back to Margalit.
Great, thank you, Hillary. So you've had a successful meeting and possibly even a series of meetings, and you're ready to implement your plan. But what, as Hillary alluded to, is that since there's so much information, questions and concerns will probably come up after the meeting, that you want to think about how will those changes, how will you manage those changes, how will you manage the commitments that you've already made in the meetings already, how are you going to create a timeline, who's going to be responsible. So really thinking now about how you want to handle the process after the meeting is a great way to prepare as well. And in fact, we had a client who shared that after they had shared the return plan to their leadership team, where they established a schedule that required the leaders to be on site every day, but the team was only going to be coming in a staggered way. Some of the leaders had spoke up and said that they weren't comfortable with the idea of having to be on site every day, and they wanted to come up with another option. So if you can imagine, if companies are getting pushback or concerns from leaders, there's probably a good chance that staff is going to have their own issues or concerns that will pop up after the fact. So the idea of needing to make changes after the meeting is a very possible situation. So it's good to be prepared, knowing that this could happen, and how you want to process those questions, those concerns, who's responsible for managing any new commitments that are made, any new changes, how are you going to communicate that to the team? Are you going to circle back with another meeting? I imagine there will be a series of meetings because, as we said earlier, things are changing day by day. There may be a need to prolong going back to work based on wherever you are, if there's more spikes in the virus, etc. So really it's a day by day environment of how we are managing all this. But the idea of being as prepared as possible will really support you with the continuous changes that are showing up that we're all managing. So having a plan to manage commitments and changes after will really help as you move forward beyond this time and the preparation and the meeting phase. So that pretty much covers the whole plan of preparation, facilitating the meeting, initiating it, and how you're going to manage it after the meeting. And if you have any questions that have come up since we've started, we're going to invite you to go ahead and put those in the chat. And I'm going to also invite Candace to come back. And also I want to mention too that each worksite is so unique. And one of the things that we're doing at Dynamic Team is supporting our clients in how to facilitate and manage these meetings that are related to your unique office and workspace. And we'd be happy to support you in that moving forward if that's something that we can help you with.
Right. Let me unmute, or I'm sorry, take off my, I figured out how to work my video, everyone. Isn't that great? Okay. So I just want to thank Hillary and Margalit for sharing their expertise and offering so much great information to everyone. I think one of the points that is really, did I cut off my video? I did. Wow, I can't keep it on. One of the things that I think is super important about this process and the fluidity is something that Margalit and I talked about before the session started today, and that is just the need for ongoing transparency with your teams and your workers and leaders and employees, because it's appropriate to let people know things will keep changing. It's appropriate to say, we're going to call you, and give you updates with this level of frequency so that you always know when to expect that next bit of information, because people will want to know what to expect, even though everything is so unexpected right now. So we have some questions that were added to the chat box, and I will read you the first one and Hillary, Margalit, you can decide who's going to respond to this one. What do you recommend when we have rule breakers or those who think they can color outside of the lines?
Margalit, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take it?
Go for it.
Okay, so if you have rule breakers, the first thing to remember is, what is your general discipline policy for when people don't perform in the way you want them to perform? Do you have a progressive discipline policy? What have you communicated to employees in advance of how you're going to deal with people who aren't following the rules? What are the requirements? How is it going to be determined? How is it going to be tied to performance? Is it going to be added to, excuse me, is it going to be added to any sort of performance review? But most importantly, it's essential to think about the safety of all people. If somebody is not going to maintain the safety protocols, it's really important to decide ahead of time how you're going to deal with that. I can't answer for your work site what you should do, but I know that you need to have that decision made. If you have any questions about that, or you want to get some ideas specific to your culture and your organization, I'm sure Dynamic Team Solutions can be a partner with you in those kinds of decision-making opportunities.
You know,
And
that's, you have more to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Margalit.
I just want to add to, you know, as I mentioned earlier about how we're all dealing with this so differently. And I would also invite a conversation with that person to find out, you know, maybe what's going on behind their reasons for not, you know, following protocol. Maybe there's, you know, some other personal issues as well. So just also giving that person an opportunity to talk about what's going on in their life as a, you know, as a way to understand where they're coming from too.
Excellent.
I think
points.
that's a really good point, Margalit.
Yeah, thank you, Hillary.
And I wanted to add just one more thought, which sort of ties together with what was already shared. You have to also consider what precedent you're setting. You may have a leader that's the person that's breaking the rule. How does that relay to what is and isn't allowed? I mean, we're talking about basically a very human sense of safety. And so you need to be really clear in your own mind. And this is part of that preparation point that Hillary and Margalit were covering. What is and isn't going to be the firm line? Where do you want people to let you know when someone has crossed the line? Because it may be that some people are uncomfortable, but they don't say anything. And that again can set in stone some precedent that you would not want. So I would encourage you to make sure that you outlay what your expectations are of people letting you know about rule breakers and people who might color outside of the lines, letting them know that, you know, the safety and the comfort of being in the workplace is your top priority, things like that. I think the more you clarify the value and importance, and as the ladies also shared, create structure of what will happen if a rule is broken, so people know and you can openly communicate that, it all allows you to structure it a little bit more tightly and create more fluidity. Even with all this change, there'll be some clear lines already, you know, determined.
I think, Candace, another thought around this is that it may cause conflict, like you were saying, between your employees. Not just is it going to be someone who it doesn't feel comfortable confronting the other person or even going to HR or whomever to report that somebody's coloring outside the lines. I like the way you say that. But also that it could create conflict if people do confront one another. And what is your process for handling that conflict? Remembering that this may cause a lot more conflict than you're expecting. People are anxious. People are fearful about this pandemic. And I think it's really important not just to think about their psychological safety, but to remember that they may be handling it in different ways. And what is your plan for supporting both people within the conflict?
Yeah, I had somebody add in a comment. It's less of a question, more of a comment. How do we manage an employee who says they're not going to come in because someone's violated the rules? You know, what are we going to do then?
Well, that's again.
Do they need to keep coming in? I think was sort of the question within the question.
Right, yeah. Right. And I think that it's important because if that person doesn't want to come in because they don't want to adhere to the rules, do you even want them in the office if they've already made clear that they won't wear a face covering or they won't clean their desk on a regular basis or whatever it is? I think that's different than a consideration if someone has a concern about the safety of people at home. It's certainly different than considering if they refuse to follow the rules.
Right. I have another question here. Do you recommend, how do you recommend we facilitate the meeting? Should we divide it up? Should we do it by team? What do you recommend?
Well, I would say it really depends on the size of your team, the way you're structured in terms of offices. Some of you maybe, we have a client that has a few offices throughout the country, so I imagine they're probably going to maybe have meetings specific to their work sites. It depends on your leadership team, how many employees you have. So really it's thinking about how will you best be able to manage and communicate these ideas. How do you think it's going to be the most easy and receptive for your team and digestible? Or maybe there's already a culture where, you know, we have all hands every week. So it seems like to make the most sense to have the meeting as part of your weekly all hands. So really it can be very depending on how your culture, your meeting setups are already established. So do what works best for you also as a leader in terms of, you know, what you feel comfortable with in terms of how you think the information is going to be best served to people. And Hillary, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that this is going to be a huge change for a lot of people coming back into the site. Not just a change in terms of coming back to site, but also in terms of how they're interacting once they're there. This has never been an issue before for us, and so there are lots of changes. And I think you need to have the leadership, the leaders in the organization really being clear that they support these protocols, that they support the entire effort of bringing people back to site in a way that provides physical and psychological safety, and that their expectation is that people will follow protocols. So even though you may have, say, somebody in HR leading the discussion on protocols, I would recommend that you have a leader, maybe the top leadership or a leader of a site, like Margalit was saying, if you have different sites throughout the company. I would have that person start out the discussion to give people the feeling that the leadership really supports the effort that's being made.
Okay, great. I have another question here. It says, how do we get people to voice their concerns? I'm changing their wording a little bit. How do we get people to voice their concerns if we are trying to attend to them, but we're not getting much in the way of a response?
I think, again, it's really important to let them know that it's safe to share their concerns, like you really are wanting it. You know, it really depends on the culture. In a larger meeting, people may feel more intimidated to share their concerns and questions. We've seen that. So maybe the idea, if you really want a lot of input, maybe having smaller meetings to create that space of people feeling safer, or maybe in pods where or maybe they work as a project team, etc. And also letting them know that their questions and concerns or issues after the meeting is also welcomed. A lot of people are just going to wait till after the meeting. Also, they will be digesting the information and thinking about it. So, you know, you'll want to give them the time to process all the information, how it might impact their personal life, their families, their individual situation. So letting them know as well that you are open to share your concerns or questions after the meeting, to bring them to you, whether you decide to do that by email or, you know, however works best for your team. So just really emphasizing that you want their input, I think is a big part of it. And then maybe also, if some of the leaders on the team demonstrate their vulnerability and share their personal experience challenges, oftentimes when staff sees a leader be vulnerable and open, it gives them permission to be open and vulnerable. So I would say, share your personal story, your experience with this whole thing. And I think that will also invite your team to feel safer.
Yeah,
I think also, go ahead, Candace.
Okay. I had a thought that piggybacks on what you were saying, Margalit, and that is, you know, even if you're not sure if there's concerns, but you have the hunch, and that's usually what we hear, is that I'm sure there are concerns, but no one's voicing them. Sometimes, you know, using what's I refer to as that assumptive close is maybe do a Zoom meeting. Maybe you're just going to do an all hands on deck meeting, use that Zoom, you know, breakout room option, and say, tell us, break out in your rooms, what are the top 3 concerns? And then everybody has, you know, they're working in collaboration with others. They have to come up with an answer. And you might be able to tickle out those concerns that otherwise are not being voiced.
Nice.
I think in addition to that, Candace, if you decide to do the breakout rooms, one thing to consider And it depends again on your culture, as Margalit pointed out, but you might want to consider having a leader facilitate those breakout sessions if you have an environment where people are comfortable speaking in front of their leaders. And also remembering that if they do facilitate a meeting, that they can start off by offering a concern of their own or telling a story like Candace just mentioned. But sometimes making sure that you have somebody facilitate those breakout sessions can be useful, again, depending on how you normally communicate within your organization.
I think we have just one last question that's in here for now. We'll never know who's going to pop up with another one. It says, what if people start bringing those interesting outside issues into the conversation? Politics, other things that are, maybe on the fringe connected to the issue, but not directly part of the plan internal to the organization.
I think that's, that's a basic, I hate to say it, but that's a basic conflict resolution issue, because people are bringing up things that are of importance to them, but may not be important to the conversation directly. Mm-hmm. So it's important to make sure that people feel heard, that their concerns are taken into consideration, and at the same time learning how to circle back to the topic itself, circle back to the main point that you're making. And you might just say, that's a valid conversation, that's a valid question to ask, and at the same time, that's not something we're prepared to answer at this time. Mm-hmm. And that we can circle back with you. We can circle back to your question and your needs, perhaps privately, as well as in the group as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that was our last question. Did you have any closing comments to make, Margalit?
Thank you for being here today. I hope that this information was helpful for you. And we will be sharing, Candace, are we going to be sharing a written outline?
Yes, we'll have a handout that we'll share after the meeting, as well as providing you with, after we do have it posted on our website, a link to the webinar, should there be pieces you'd like to revisit or to share with others.
Yeah. So it's been my pleasure to be here with you today, and I wish you all well with this process, this journey that we're all going through and managing. And again, encouraging you to be patient with yourselves, because I know that it can feel challenging at times, because this is a whole new piece that none of us have ever gone through in the history of our lives. And it continues to unfold in very unknown and unusual ways. So just encouraging you as you move forward.
Hillary?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for coming today and participating. You had some really great questions. And I think it's important to remember that your plan that you provide really depends on you and your culture and your organization. So we are happy at DTS to support you in any decision making. We particularly have the ability to support you in facilitation and in devising how your meeting is going to go, and then some issues around conflict resolution. But it's important to know that you can do this. You can create a great plan, you can communicate that plan, and you can do a really great meeting to support your employees to coming back to site.
Okay. Margalit, if you don't mind bringing us back over to our closing slide, I would just like to have that on screen as we close. For any of you who would like to reach out to us after today's session, you can schedule a session to get on our calendar using the link below or in the chat window. You can also reach out to us through our website or calling directly. I am pleased to be a part of this conversation with Margalit and Hillary. I think that this has been a wonderful opportunity for us to connect with you and offer you some guidance and support. If you need more than what we were able to provide during today's webinar, please do reach out to us. And thank you, as always, for being dynamic.
Thank you, Candace.
Thanks, Candace. Thanks, Hillary. And thanks,